Afternoon, everybody. I hope you're well. I'm Michelle Stevens, and I'm the Generation Services Manager here at npower. And I'm going to be running through a presentation today regarding the farming community and renewable energy. And first of all, I'd just like to thank Farmers Weekly for hosting this event. We are taking questions. I'll be taking questions at the end. We already have some pre-registered questions, and I believe we'll be having some live questions coming in as we go through. So by all means, I'll try my best to answer all of them where I can. And if not, I'll follow those up in the next couple of days with a personal response. Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to run through the slides now. I assure you it won't be death by PowerPoint. I'll try and keep it as jovial as I can. Bear in mind that it's 5 o'clock and I know you guys are all pretty busy and just come in. So yeah, I'll head off. So I just want to give you just a brief overview today of what we'll be covering. So in terms of what I'm going to be looking to cover today, we're going to have a look at what's going on in the energy market, what some of our research has found in terms of energy generation and what those opportunities might be for farmers. And also, if any farmers are thinking about renewable power, already have renewable power on their sites, how they can sell that power. So we'll go through that. So as I say, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. And as I say, I'll try my best to answer those for you. So we're going to go and jump now into the market context and what's going on in the energy markets. So effectively, what's going on in the energy markets is we have we're seeing significant growth in the renewable generation in the UK, both homegrown UK renewables, and that's set to overtake fossil fuels for the first year in 2024. And also, we're looking at ambitious government targets that have been set for 2030. Whether or not we think those clean energy goals are achievable or not, nonetheless, we're still gearing towards those, and some industries and some areas will reach those and others will potentially lag behind. We're also looking at some of the major policy moves that are looking to encourage renewable developments as well within the UK. So we've got a number of those. So you've got the GB Energy Hub, you've got the reform of the planning rules, which some would argue are far too late, or at least they're here now. We've then also got increased budget for the CFD auction. And then we've got the Clean Power 2030 action plan as well. So what does that mean for independent generators? Well, independent generators are and will continue to be an important part of the role within the UK's energy generation mix. And it's really important because not only do they provide reliable power for both homes and businesses across the UK, but they also help support that energy network. And more importantly, they're helping us try and achieve those net zero goals. They're largely unaffected by the pressures and volatility of the wholesale energy markets because of the very nature of them in terms of independent generators. They are much smaller, and therefore there is a lot more resilience around those. So what does that mean in terms of specific roles for landowners, developers, farmers, etc.? Well, according to the NFU, farmers own or host around 70% of the UK's total solar generation capacity. For some of you, that may not be a figure that you're not familiar with, and for others, that may be quite an astonishing figure to think that 70% of the solar that's developed within the UK is on farming agricultural land. Solar also remains the most popular form of renewable energy, second to that of wind generation. And we've got at least 20,000 agricultural rooftop installations and about 1,300 ground-mounted solar farms within the UK. And that's currently what's already developed and up and running now in situ. This is why our views on the policy and when it comes to the energy policy are really, really important, and that of both our generators and also the general public in understanding what that may be. And in particular, what the energy generation and the opportunity for farmers may be as well. So that's where we go to next. So in relation to that, what did our research show in terms of, how we can harness renewables within the farming community? Well, we've worked with Farmers Weekly to gauge the opinions of landowners who have on-site generation. If you completed the survey, then first of all, thank you very much for you. And this report is our Clean Power 2030 report, and it has a catchy title of Harnessing the Power of the UK's Independent Energy Generations. And what it did is it looked at the responses from the community, and in particular, what they thought of the current and proposed energy policy. Also, the role that they think independent generators will play within that decarbonised energy system. And then lastly, if and how they are selling their excess energy to other organisations. In particular, a couple of slides ago, when I mentioned how many rooftop solar installations there are within the farming community, that's quite considerable. The vast majority of that is used on site, but then at times there will be, in the height of the summer, where they have periphery that's excess to what the farming needs are, and it's looking at how they might sell that. And that's quite important because it's a revenue income for them. So we'll look about in terms of the research and what we actually found out. So most importantly, independent generators can and already do help us meet the business demands for renewable energy, and our report backs this up. And in particular, when we have a look at this, 2/3 of the respondents said that they've seen an increase in business demand to buy power from independent generators over the past 2 years. So that's whereby large import customers, high street names, etc., are looking to link with independent generators, not so much on the very small side, but I'd say on the medium to large scale farm developments. 30% of the respondents said that this was a significant increase. And in terms of benefits to the business, there was stable pricing that is not impacted by the wholesale market. So that's one of the biggest benefits. And also the guaranteed clean energy supply. That was 33% of that in terms of the respondents to that. And more importantly, the greater energy security. Those of you who remember when we went through the Russian-Ukraine crisis, depending on how you purchased your import energy for your farms, you may have found prices increasing significantly if you were coming out to market during that time. Equally, if you were a generator and coming out to market, although the market was really high, you may have found it very difficult to secure your power or sell your power because of the volatility that was in the market. So both of those aspects do work hand in hand. So it doesn't always just impact the import side of the business in terms of pricing peaks. It can also affect the export side as well. So it is really important to think about, what independent generators can do, and importantly, what those barriers may be. So we'll have a look at some of the barriers to development now. So when we talk about barriers to development, there's several barriers which we can explore that came up in our report. And number one, not surprisingly, is planning restrictions. That goes without saying. That has been something that has been probably, arguably, one of the biggest things that I've worked in the renewable generation sector for a number of years. Has always been the biggest hot topic that you could ever, encounter. Anybody, not just in the farming community, but anybody that's looking to build renewables on their site, whether that's a large industrial commercial customer that has land to their side of their business that they've looked to put some solar on, or an AD plant, or even a wind turbine. They have all found the planning restrictions to be one of the biggest issues that they've encountered. So it's really encouraging to see that the government's taken some steps to try and address this, but we'll have to wait and see until we've got the forthcoming planning and infrastructure bill to see if it goes far enough to support those smaller generators as well. One of the other interesting things to call out on there is not just the planning. That was obviously the biggest one. You've got difficulty in securing investment at nearly 20%. So that's quite a significant number, really, in terms of that. And what they found over the years is that's probably more aligned to the fact that there are no subsidies now. And I know there are a few pre-read questions that have come in that talk about subsidies. So I will get onto that and hopefully answer some of the questions that you have come through. And in particular, that can be really difficult when somebody is looking to develop. it's trying to get that investment. So what are the routes to market for you? If there are no subsidies, then what are those routes? And I will talk about those in a couple of slides time. And then you've got sort of community concerns as well. So you've got the the lengthy timescales of building a project, and then the community. So it really is something that, it's just not one thing. There are several things that are going to impact a development and a potential idea, or farm owners have got the benefit of land. It's not just that, it's also connection as well as planning consent. So there are a lot of other things to consider as well. We will now look at some of the other areas in terms of how government may support independent generators. So our research said that, perhaps unsurprisingly, that the top ask from government is to reduce the red tape. That's something that, as I said before on the previous slide, that is something that has been called out for, I don't know, the last 10, 14, 15 years, as long as I can remember, is the amount of red tape that goes around planning and localized planning restrictions. And to some degree, I do agree with some of that. You don't necessarily want people putting up huge turbines right next to your house, so you do have to think about your local community and how that could affect them. But equally, there needs to be a balance, and there needs to be a proper balance in terms of meeting those 2030 goals, renewable generation, land, infrastructure, grid, and importantly, red tape, because it's the red tape that causes the longest concern as you're going through planning. Planning is not something that you're going to jump through the hoops within 4 to 5 months. It can take a number of years, depending on the size of the development that you're looking to build and where you're going to build it, and equally your local authority. That's one of the biggest burdens. Each authority have got their own versions of red tape, and you might find it very difficult to get a project through if historically there have been a number of projects that have already been challenged and planning permission not authorized. So that can equally be a barrier, another level of barrier to go through. So importantly, red tape, it goes without saying, 63% are saying that, red tape for renewables is how government can support more grants and initiatives. I'm not necessarily sure that, although we have that as quite a key point in terms of what people are asking for, I won't necessarily say that I think there are going to be more subsidies coming along in the future or grants. I think it will just be the parameters of what we already have, which is non-subsidy routes to market, which give a price level, such as the contracts for difference, and then also the smart export guarantee. Those are two very, very different routes to market. And importantly, contracts for difference do tend to be for the larger scale projects. So potentially still farm generated, because they need a lot of land, but not necessarily farmer owned projects. So I do take that as it says. And in particular, development of the power purchasing agreement market. There's around 31% of people are asking for that. And that's just a route to market. So making it more accessible for the smaller generators with more on farm generation, if they're at the smaller scale, making sure that there is, a wider network of potential off-takers like ourselves at npower that are prepared to work with them or contract with them and make it easy for them to contract. And I've worked with the farming community for probably best part of 14, 15 years now. So very familiar with the farming community. But equally, when you work at I worked at consultancy previously, but equally when you work at a large supplier, one of the barriers can be that they feel that they're potentially too small to contract with somebody of the likes of npower, because we are a very large supplier. We do have a very large book in terms of our renewable generation. But I would say, and I will say this, I'll go through it at the very end, but I work with my team work with a lot of independent generators, independent farm generators of 500 kilowatt wind turbines, 500 kilowatt or 460 kilowatt AD plants, etc. So on farm, on site generation, and small scale solar, either rooftop and field. So it's a combination. So just rest assured there are some off-takers out there that are prepared to work with on-site farm generation as well. So in terms of answers, other answers that we had, they want, importantly, people want a stable and predictable regime, because what you can't have is one government coming in and saying or taking us in one direction and therefore driving policy that way, for another government to come in and supersede something, because that doesn't provide stability. And I'm hoping that the current government that's in and the next government, or if they're re-elected, that government, keep that stability, because we are still aiming towards those clean energy targets for 2030. And what we can't have is a government that flips between what might be good for the Conservatives or the Labour or the Lib Democrats. We need a consistency. That's both from an off-taker point of view, from a supplier point of view, but more importantly from a generator point of view, either if you're going to be building new or second phase developments, or you already have developments, you need to know that you have got that consistency and rigidity in terms of the regime. One of the biggest issues, you can probably see it on there on the screen, is accelerated grid connection. It goes without saying that the DNOs have got a lot of infrastructural upgrades to do across the country. It's not just dynamic to one particular area, because that's a high area that has a large proportion of wind, for example, in Scotland, both the east and the west coast. It isn't. It's dynamic across the whole of the UK. We're working with quite an archetypical grid infrastructure that's not really had a lot of investment to it, which means it's very, very difficult for some people to access getting grid connections. And I've heard of people putting their names down for grid connections, or to understand where they potentially might get a grid connection, and it's in 3, 4, 5 years' time. Well, when you're potentially looking at building a project now or going in for planning, you need to know that you're going to get that security of a grid connection. And equally, they may also provide a grid connection, but it might be half of the grid connection that you actually physically need for now, with the view that in 2 to 3 years' time, you will have the additional grid connection. That doesn't necessarily give the stability that new generators or generators that are looking to build their second or first phase projects need. And that's something that really, really does need to be accelerated, in terms of that real focus from all of the DNOs across the UK to really push for that grid infrastructure and that upgrade to the infrastructure as well. Excuse me. Reinstating or extended the feed-in tariff scheme. Again, that's something that a number of people have said, these are the top answers that people are asking for. I don't think that is going to happen. When the feed-in tariff scheme ended in 2019, the ROC scheme ended in 2017, followed by 2 years later the feed-in tariff scheme. There was a lull in between there before the new smart export guarantee came on board, which, as I say, is not a subsidy, but it just provides a route to market, which is a fixed route for generators. And then also for the larger schemes, there was the contracts for difference. So I think there's already schemes out there, but I appreciate it doesn't necessarily give the subsidy that previous historical schemes have had, which have given them the comfort level to which they can afford to build and also get the investment behind them, because otherwise it can be quite difficult. And then more support for innovation, such as agricultural PV as well. So again, those are just a few of the key highlights in terms of the respondents that we had, in terms of how the government could support those generators. So we'll now move on to what you can do in terms of selling your power. So there are a number of ways that you can sell your power, and I will just go into a couple of them in terms of what they are. So in particular, for any generator wanting to sell your power, then the best route to market is what we call a power purchasing agreement. And for those of you who may not be familiar with what that is, that's a contract between you as the generator and a business being myself as being the off-taker. And essentially what we're doing is we're agreeing to purchase that energy from you, or you're selling it to us via a route to market to generate a level of income. That can be, you know, that can vary in terms of all different commercial terms. It can have various different start dates, delivery schedules, pricing mechanism, payment terms. It can also include, for those that are already generating and have the renewable obligation certificates, so as we call them, the green certificates, it can include those, as well as the REGOs, which are the things that green up the electricity and provide the origin of certification. So we can do all of that, and it can cover both existing assets and also new assets. So it can provide a lot of reassurance in terms of a route to market, and importantly, confidence from your investors, your banking institutions, etc., that are looking to do that you have a stable and a secure route to market, and more importantly, credibility from your off-taker in terms of that. So generally, there are two types of PPA that generators will go for. They will go for a fixed price or a flexible price. So I will talk on the next slide about what those differences are, and I'll just give them a quick run through. There are other myriads of that, but those tend to typically be the two that we can track the most on. So the main differences are, for example, on a fixed price PPA, it tends to be more suited to the small to medium sized generators, which typically have an output of less than 10 gigawatts per annum, and those with stable or predictable outputs. So those ones that they can forecast what the volume is going to do. Now, arguably, you can still do that on intermittent technologies, which are wind and solar. But again, everybody's different, but we tend to operate fixed price PPAs for hydro sites as well. And what they do is they give you a set amount or a set price up front for each unit of power that you generate. It's a straightforward income stream. You're protected from the volatilities of the market, and it offers a very competitive price with the reassurance of regular monthly payments, which is what all generators are looking for in terms of that. So because you've agreed a price, they're typically anything from 6 months in tenure up to around 36 months is probably the furthest out that we would do a fixed price for. And as we say, it's typically suited to the more smaller end of the market. Whereas a flexible PPA is very different. That's more used for any type of generation, but in particular, more baseload technologies take this, and we have some large baseload technologies on there. We do have a number of wind and solar PPAs on those as well. And for example, they're more commonly used for assets with an output of around about 6 gigawatts per hour and per annum and above. So all those where they've got multiple sites that would then collectively across a group of their sites make up more than 6 gigawatts per annum of that. Now, it's very different because it doesn't give you a fixed price from the word go. However, you could trade all of that volume in one go, and it effectively turns it into a fixed price because you've basically secured 100% of your power there and then. It gives you more control. So rather than, in terms of how much you can sell, so rather than making a decision today for 24 months on a fixed price, you could make part of your decision today and only hedge 25% of that volume. Excuse me. And then next month after, if you're watching the market or etc., you could then make another 25% and another 25% and another 25%. So overall, you may have made 4 decisions. And overall, that will potentially give you a better average price than going for a fixed price on one day. Because I can assure you, nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody could say when the best price is to fix a price. The prices have been very volatile of late, so they were fairly high and then dropped off quite significantly and then recovered a little bit. Nobody's got a crystal ball because there are so many facets that impact that marketplace. It's not just down to the wind power or the temperature. It's global, it's economics, it's politics, it's LNG and where the LNG is going, how much the LNG, how much carbon's trading for, all of these facets impact our market. Although we're a small market within the UK, all of those things impact that market, and therefore they will affect the fixed price that you're getting or your flex price. But it's ideal for generators that are, either larger or they're growing their assets and they want that element of control, or they're a little bit more sophisticated. I would say to the farming community, I would look at flexible PPAs as being very similar to how you may trade wheat. You'll be very familiar with how you trade wheat. For those of you who are in the arable side of the farming community, think of flex trading on power as no different to that. The only exception is that where you may be trading wheat and you may have traded that several times over and it's never once left your barn, with flexible power, it will effectively leave you when it goes through the meter point. But I would use the similarities of trading wheat as a good example of that and how that might work. So hopefully I've given you a little bit of an insight in terms of what the route to market may be. But again, it's about finding out what is the right route to market for your particular asset, because it really depends on whether you're wanting a price security, how rigid you need to be on that price security. It depends on the level of your annual output as to which route to market may be best for you or is even achievable for you, your risk appetite, and equally your organization's objective. If this is to chase the highest price possible, then locking into a fixed price at day one is potentially not going to be the best opportunity for you. However, doing something more flexibly might be the right opportunity for you. But then it comes down to the size of the asset as to whether that is actually still amenable to you. So lots of things we need to think about in terms of that. So just a reminder, on the fixed price PPAs, you're looking at anything sort of like up to 10 gig, and flexible PPAs around about the 6 gigawatts per annum, and moving forward. Again, one of the other things, in terms of, what may be right for you is also the time constraint and your risk appetite. So if you leave it quite late into the year and you're a 1st of October renewal, for example, for those of you who already have active PPAs, then if you leave that decision point until September, you really have a very short window in which to go out and get prices and make a decision. Whereas doing that a couple of months earlier, you may get slightly better prices, but equally they could be weaker prices because it really depends what's happening in the market. And that's why it has to be the right choice for you in terms of who you partner with. So we'll have a look at, in terms of what the benefits of selling your power via a PPA are. So in terms of, apologies, sorry, I've got a little tickle in my throat. In terms of the benefits of selling your power via the power purchasing agreement, our research highlighted that the top benefits of selling that were, regular or additional income was around 65%. So it was quite a high benefit in terms of that. It does depend on the type of PPA. For example, as I've said, it does also look at supporting the energy transition. So again, that is seen as a good benefit to look at selling your power via a PPA. Again, investor confidence, that's really important as well. So around 12% of that is around, the benefit of that is your investor confidence as well. And then that will be something around the green benefits of the renewable power. We then have, your energy partner. So why would we be a good partner for you? Well, we have an extensive proven track record. We support over 100 independent generators across the UK. We've got a guarantee of reliability. We're npower Business Solutions. We're part of the wider E.ON group. We're technology agnostic as well. So we support, and we're very keen to support all types of generation across the UK and for all different routes to market as well. We're market leading in terms of our range of products and routes to market. My team in particular we have over, well, it's in excess of 100 years worth of experience between us in the energy market, both the import world as being at npower, but also the renewable energy world as well. So we've got an extensive knowledge base. There isn't probably anything we haven't come across. I'll make that very clear. And my team offer a dedicated account manager. So you would have a dedicated account manager to look after your account. And we also have customer relationship managers that support that. And their role is to also check data, because data can be a big issue. So we make sure that we've got the right data, and we flag that if we are having any issues with data. We'll also let you know as a customer, and then we'll go and find out why there's an issue with your meter operator or your data collector, for example. So those are some of the key things really in terms of how we manage and maintain that relationship. And importantly, we give access to our 24/7 risk navigator platform. So that's for our flex customers, where they can manage manage their portfolio and also check on the markets, etc. They've got access to our operations optimization desk, whereby they can have that dialogue with them in terms of what's happening in the market, as well as receiving information from that as well. We host an awful lot of webinars, not just directly in terms of the farming community, but we do that in terms of npower Business Solutions. Myself and my team, we do host a lot of webinars. And we also, we're market leading. We've got a lot of extensive experience in this marketplace, but importantly, we look to help our generators. So we'll keep generators abreast of new emerging intel in terms of what may be coming up on the horizon. We've recently been supporting our customers on non-final demand who have generation on their site to help them reduce their import bill, which a lot of them who weren't with us in terms of they're selling their power had not been informed about. And although these might be small in comparison to their import bill, any saving per megawatt hour that they can make is a saving back in their pocket and not going out the door. So we're very keen to, where we can, utilize as much information as we can from our industry experts. We're there at the table with Ofgem, etc. So we quite often lobby Ofgem and their proposed partners in terms of, we are somebody that they invite to the table when they're looking at new legislation or bringing in new modifications. And they will ask us in terms of, well, what's our viewpoint? And we will go out to some of our larger and smaller generators to get the viewpoint of an actual generator rather than just our point of view. We will go to get an independent or independence point of view to how not only do we think it's going to impact them, but importantly, how they think it might impact them. And I can't always say that they listen, but nonetheless, we do feed it in. And there have been some instances where we've been able to guide and support those changes through from the voice of the generator or the voice of us as a large supplier in that market space as well. So we do have a lot of breadth in terms of that. I'll just take a very quick sip of water as I'm going to now move on to the questions. So I'm just going to close down my slides and have a look at the questions. So I will now stop sharing and just bear with me a moment. I'm just waiting to stop sharing, so I do apologize. Right. Okay, I think I've stopped sharing there. I'm just going to have a look at some questions coming in. So I do know we had got some questions coming in live as well. Okay, right. Okay. Quick one at the bottom. I think this is one of the last ones that's come in. Yeah, so I won't say who this is from, but it's from Chartered Surveyor that's asking, am I able to share the key headline terms for a PPA? I'll probably pick up with that independently, if you don't mind, because every headline term is really different for every PPA, because it really depends on start dates, end dates. It's a good question because we do get asked that quite a lot. Start date, end dates, technology, It'll depend on whether there's on-site usage. So we have to understand what the project is. So I will pick up with you over the coming days if that's okay. Another really good question's come in regarding grid capacity. Is grid capacity is a significant barrier? When is the capacity going to be significantly improved? I think that's still ongoing in terms of what DNO need to do, because it's the old adage of Rome wasn't built in a day is something I use quite often within my line of work. And I would definitely use that in terms of how I would represent DNO and their journey to significantly ratify the current grid infrastructure. They are already doing this, but albeit it's not a mainframe across the whole of the UK in one go, because that just isn't possible. You've got a number of different distribution network operators across the whole of the UK, and they all work independently, but they are all doing things. It does cost a considerable amount of money, but it's time as well. And that's really important as well. So I've got a question here from another farmer. We do not generate energy ourselves, but we have sought a PPA for a minimum supply at the right price. We would consider accepting. Unfortunately, we are continually told this is too low for a PPA. Okay, so I think, again, I'll reach out to you, Steve, separately. But I think what's being asked here is that this particular farmer doesn't generate energy themselves, but uses around 300,000 kilowatt hours per annum, and was looking for, I would say, a corporate PPA to back that off to green up that power. Steve, I'll reach out to you directly if that wasn't what your question was, but I will reach out to you directly. That's an interesting, if that is what you were being told, that it's too low of a figure to look for those kind of corporate matching of somebody that has green power, say one of my generators, against your import supply to green it up. Now, how most import clients currently, or had previously, greened up their PPA, their import power, brown power, is by buying REGOs. Now, that is an option for you, but there is a premium to REGOs. And it's not always necessarily the right route to market either, because you don't have that additionality. You don't see the benefit in that. So a lot of smaller import clients now are coming collectively to us. So we do have a group of public sectors that have been asking us a number of questions over the last couple of years. How do they access that? Because independently, like Steve's put here, they are far too small. But as a group collective, perhaps not. So maybe, Steve, your question is, I will reach out to you independently as well, is maybe if you're part of, so we work with a number of the big farming groups across the UK. So I won't necessarily mention them all on here, but I should imagine anybody that's on here that is a farmer will be part of that network. So what I would say is, put that forward to those farming communities that you're grouped with, that you maybe purchase your import power from, or if you don't, get in touch with them and ask them the question about how you might do that as a collective group. They will then in turn come back to me, because we do work with pretty much nigh on nearly all of them in the UK. So that's something I'd probably pick up. I'll probably pick up separately with you, but that may be a question. Yes, Steve's just said, yes, okay, because you've converted. Right, okay, yes, okay, thanks, Steve. That was the question then, thank you. I've just seen that come in. Yeah, so yeah, I'll pick up with you separately on that, if that's okay. One of the other questions we've got is, how does one secure the best PPA structure without using a broker? Is it possible to use SEG, or how possible is it to sell on site to renters of farm building? Sorry, 3 questions. That's fine. I'm not sure where that's come from, but it was one that was already sent in. Okay, so again, in terms of PPAs, you'll all have access, or via Farmers Weekly, they can fire those across for anybody that's given us permission to touch base with you after for marketing. And that's basically so we can contact you, because otherwise we've got no other way of contacting you after the event. And it really depends on the size of generation that you're looking at. You don't have to use a broker because invariably a broker will want some form of commission for introducing you to somebody like my team, for example. Equally, if it's too small, then you could go to the Smart Export Guarantee Tariff, which is available to anybody. You don't need a broker to go to that at all. You can just contact, for example, Eon Next, who do our feed-in tariffs. They do the Smart Export Guarantees. Your last question on that of 3 was how possible, just to reiterate it, was how possible is it to sell on site to renters of farm buildings? That's maybe something you do on site. So you would possibly, if you have generated, let's use this. This is an example that I can give because I've been involved in it before. Historically, is whereby you've got some wind turbines on site or solar or AD. Doesn't really matter, but a renewable generation of some description that's coming in order to sell it to your on-farm renters, to make sure it's proportional and you're charging them for what they're actually using, you'd need to put some kind of metering there, such as a sub-meter, which would then just tally up physically what they're using. But equally, you'd need to be very careful of when that is not generating. For example, if it was solar, that they can still import and you can charge them. It's almost just like being a landlord. So you're charging them sort of like a landlord rate for the import. That's pretty much how I've done that with a few other customers in the past. So hopefully that answers that question. One question, interestingly, is what's the future of biomass looking like? An interesting one. Now, it depends. If this person happens to be on, I'm going to look and see whether you do come on and ask me the question. I know I've got another one at the bottom just come in, but do you mean biomass as in wood chip biomass, or do you mean anaerobic digestion? Because they are two different things, although the principle is still the same. They are two different things. So I'll tackle the wood-based one first. The wood-based one, I do feel that sort of like the large biomass sites that we see today in very industrial type areas, I feel that will be, or we're not seeing as many of those being built in the future. And that's due to a lot of regulation around wood and burning of that effectively. That's not to say that the ones that are currently built are not up to scratch. It just means that it's going to get a little bit more difficult on the environmental policy for those. Equally, you have to think the vast majority of the ones that I have contracted in the UK don't use virgin wood. So they're not using virgin wood to then just burn. They are using recycled wood. So therein lies another issue in terms of where you're getting the recycled wood from. So the more and more of those sites that come on, there will be a supply and demand issue for that recycled wood within the UK, which then means that potentially that has to be imported, which then doesn't look very good, because if you're importing wood on large ships, vessels, etc., to come into docks and ports, then naturally that doesn't necessarily help with the environment because of the fossil fuels, etc., and the carbon that's been used to transport that for you to then generate green power. So that answers that. In terms of the anaerobic digestion, there isn't really any change to that. The only thing I would say is if it's not using on-farm waste, so mixture of maize, chicken manure, potatoes, whatever it may be, and you're reliant on food stocks, whether that's from the local authorities or whether it's from supermarkets or other realms, manufacturers, you just have to make sure you've got your food stocks in line and you've got them for a long period of time, because AD can be quite tricky if you start mixing up what's coming in. So yeah, I'd definitely say AD is still viable, very, very viable. I'll just do a couple more questions. I'm conscious of time here. So I've got another one at the bottom. I'm a farmer with wind turbines, but cannot expand due to the local grid. Yes, that's right. Is there a mechanism where I can meet other farmers that might be interested in hosting an energy project? Okay. I will probably say to yourself, Norman, I won't say who you are apart from Norman. I would say, Norman, probably look at that farming community that I mentioned earlier in terms of those large farming networks, and have that conversation, because you may find somebody that's in your local area or not far from you that has some grid that isn't being utilized or can get access to the grid that you can't at the moment, that might be interested in hosting an energy project. So I definitely say there could be some really good collaboration work going on there as well. I've got one here from Phil saying PPAs I thought could be used for 250 kilowatt generation and about. If I understand it, you're saying 600 kilowatt or above. No, that was just an example, Phil, of the types of independent generators we've worked with. We have actually worked with much smaller than that, but that tends to be more of a group collective. Can we pull multiple farm generators with half-hourly meters together to reach 6 gig? Yes, you potentially could. Again, if you're in one of those farming group collectives, I would say they do know, most of them do know who I am. I would say get together, Phil, with a few of your other farming community members and say, look, collectively we can do something together, whether that's, and I have worked with farming communities before, and other groups that work together to collectively get the volume. You're still paid for what you generate because you have your own half-hourly meter, so therefore it comes in. There's no cross subsidization of that. But what there is the benefit of numbers, which does help. It really, really does help. And again, when you're looking at several projects rather than one standalone project, then that does help as well. Rachel's asked, is there a future for hydrogen production? Interesting question, actually, because there is. It's just, I think it's underutilized. There's still more to go with hydrogen. I definitely think there is a route to market for it. We haven't done any hydrogen plants ourselves, although we've been involved in a number of key conversations around testing. E.ON itself does do, as a larger parent company, does have a big hold in hydrogen, as they do with EV car chargings, etc., and CHP plants. So there is something there. So I do think there is a future. I'm just not sure what that future is. And apologies, I can't answer that. Got one come in from Sam. Is it realistic for farmers to install 1 meg of solar in the coming years, or would this likely be too small to interest buyers? If you're talking about, would it be too small to interest me as a buyer? No, it won't be too small. I think for you, it's more about whether it stacks up as an investment for you. If you've got land that you're not necessarily farming for whatever reason, but would be suitable for solar, and you can get the grid connection. If you've already got the land and you can get the grid connection because you've already connected or it's available to you, you're already 2/3 of the way there. Your third hurdle is your investment, either yourself or getting an investor. I would definitely say that we would look at that. Again, you could do that as a standalone, or you could indeed look at that as a collective group, Sam. So hopefully that answers your question. I'll just see if there's anything else that's slightly different. Okay, so what I haven't come across before is, can common landowners enter the scheme, or is it just individual commoners entering their own land? I'm not sure if I get the context of the question correctly there. Anybody can enter the scheme as long as it's your plant that you're trying to enter the scheme for. That's the one thing I would say. It doesn't matter whether you're not the landowner, but you're leasing the land from somebody. So again, looking back at what we were talking about before in terms of a few questions ago with the gentleman that I said to try and network, where he hasn't got grid, but he wants to build something else. Yeah, that's not uncommon. So yeah, you could definitely do that. Is there funding available for hydro? No, that funding finished under the ROC scheme or the feed-in tariff scheme. The only opportunity now is either CFD, but I haven't seen any CFDs for small to mid-scale hydros at all. And the only other alternative is a route to market with ourselves, such as a PPA, or indeed looking at the Smart Export Guarantee, the SEG tariff. So there are large, so it's another question that's come in, which is an interesting one. There are large solar farms proposed in most parts of the country, but very few wind farms. Will many of the proposed solar farms not be built due to an imbalance of the type of power feeding into the grid? Really good, really good question, because you could end up with a situation where you have solar self-cannibalizing itself because of the amount that potentially could come on. However, I always look at things in balance. So yes, there are some large solar farms, but there are some quite large onshore wind farms still coming on. The vast majority where we're going to get the volume from for wind is going to be the offshore ones. That goes without saying. Over the next 10, 15, 20 years, it will be those developments. But albeit they take a considerable amount of time, not to just get through planning, but equally to go into build stage and then to get to operation. You are talking from start to finish, you're talking several years. So those types of projects, although they're going to be huge and they will play a massive part in terms of our growth and heading towards those 2030 challenges for the net zero, there is still room for normal onshore wind, albeit we haven't seen it at the levels that we saw coming up to 2017 before the ROC regime finished, and that's where the larger developments were. We haven't seen that kind of growth. There has been an awful lot in terms of infrastructure around solar. So I would agree, some of the latter CFD rounds have had a huge amount of solar in there in conjunction with or rather as opposed to the wind that has been on there. But the early CFDs tended to be the wind and some of the baseload technologies. So I think we've just seen a flip of that. How are things different if we live in a national landscape? I'm not sure how to answer that question. Communities have to be engaged in this. How do you do that? So communities, that's really down to the individual, not just about planning, but it's also about the community schemes. A lot of the larger schemes tend to have a fund that they put into the local community. No, I won't say always, but usually it's around either the local schools, community halls, or a community-based project. That tends to be where any community money tends to go on these larger projects. Communities definitely have to be engaged in it, because communities can pose a very big delay in terms of planning. I think with the new planning rules being a little bit more relaxed, how those communities will fare in terms of their opposition, I'm not sure, which obviously undoubtedly could mean that there are a lot of local communities that are very opposed to these projects and may well feel that they're not being heard. And that shouldn't be the case, because everyone has the right to voice their opinion. And if a community does so and feels that, a 5 megawatt or a 10 megawatt solar farm coming into their local rural area, and the amount of lorries, etc., that will be bringing that in over the several months as that's being developed and built, after that time, those lorries do disappear. But nonetheless, that is a massive disruption for those people. So I would say, in my experience, the EPC contractor and people that are involved in that before it goes through planning do tend to have, depending on the size of scheme, they will host things with the local communities to, show them what the project's going to be, how they're going to redevelop that land, what the land's going to look like after the event, and importantly, how they're going to look to support the community with any funding that they might have for community projects as well. I'll just do another couple only. So a good question is, National Grid has quoted £2 million for the 2 kilometres connection to my farm. This makes it unviable for the 2 companies interested in my farm. Any suggestions? That isn't uncommon. That's also if people are looking at doing private wires. I've got a lot of experience in private wires as well. So again, that can be a barrier if there is a farm or a group of turbines that are being built by somebody, and a mile or 2 miles down the road there is a slight a small to medium industrial estate that could take, or one particular site that could take a vast majority of that power, then that's always a good route to look at, is your private wire. So I would say potentially whoever asked that question, I would see whether, I don't know where you are because it's one that's come in prior to the conference starting, the webinar starting. But what I would say is have a look around where you are. But nonetheless, if you do a private wire, you are still going to have cable laid. The difference is that with cable being low, I'll say it as I'll just say it. My experience with some of the farming community has been that, they will just dig their own holes and trenches for cables and then let the DNO then lay the cable, because that obviously cuts out a significant cost. It's their land, your diggers, your tractors, etc., your workforce, and I've known companies do that. Equally, I've known companies do that across their land to get it to a private wire as well, just to cut down the cost, because either getting it from the national grid or doing a private wire, you have to consider the distance. And if you're fortunate enough to be, just, across the pathway or something like that to a business, or a fence just divides you and another business, then it's always viable to go and have that conversation with them to say, this would be quite easy for us to get somebody in to, do some cabling. Are you interested in a private wire? Because it has benefits to both of you. So although I didn't answer that question directly, I probably answered it in a very different way, which might make some of you think about some of the projects you either have or you're thinking of, and whether or not you could do something in terms of a private wire. I'll just take this one more question, which is, wind turbine repowering is important for the future if any government wants to continue current onshore wind. I agree. Barriers such as planning, expense, upgrading scale, and knowing if it's economically viable is tricky. What's your advice, as turbines will be out of contract in around 7 years' time? We'd be reluctant to invest with no guarantee. Yeah. I do know of a couple actually that have been thinking about their sites, and I've got one that's going to be coming out of the ROC regime in the next 2 years. And they equally, the benefit they have is that they've already got the land. So you're right, repurposing what you've already got. They're old turbines, so they probably will run for a couple of years. They'll probably run for a couple of years, but albeit under no subsidy. And I'm going to say that's probably the same here, because if you've got them and they're running for around another 7 years, you'll be under some form of subsidy, whether that's ROC or the feed-in tariff. What I would say is that I don't necessarily think the government at the moment is going to give you any guarantee of the export tariff, because there are no subsidies. One of the things you could look at is the CFD route to market, if that continues. Again, that is here for now, but whatever iteration that becomes in future years, you're talking about something in 7 years' time. We could have gone through another government and gone into another government by then, and therefore that does mean that could be very difficult or problematic for you in terms of how do you repurpose that. But I would say that you can look at that. We've had a couple of questions here at E.ON as to whether E.ON would be interested in that patch of land, because we do actually build projects as well. So that could well be a conversation that we could have in the future as well. I'm just going to look down in case anybody asked any live questions. Yes, I have got one. Right, so one from Joe, who said, having driven across central and southern Germany recently, it appears most wind turbines are in woodland forestry sites. The turbines are about twice the size and height of turbines typically seen in the UK, with blades turning above mature treetops. Do you think this is an approach the UK should be taking, especially with a lot of large new woodland or forests being planned? I'm okay with environmental policy, but probably not to answer this in the depth that you're probably wanting, Joe. But it's a good question nonetheless. Each and every individual country has its own policies and guidelines. And and where they want to either repurpose land or make the best use of land. Again, it's going to depend on the topography of the land, what trees are there. So I would imagine they've done all of that work and understood that those trees that potentially have very little growth left in them, and therefore the turbines that are absolutely massive. Because you're right, when I think about the original turbines that were built many years ago compared to the turbines that are being built now onshore, not offshore, they are significantly huge, in comparison. So yes, you could potentially put those up. I think the issue we would have here is planning. So again, trees, trees, the type of trees that they are would still be the same. You would still have to look at that from the policy and the environmental aspect of it. But I think we would probably just get a lot of, dare I say it, red tape around that, because I'm not sure that the community and local councils would be potentially very happy with a number of turbines, because albeit even if they are in that area, the turbines have still got to get to that area, they've still got to be built. So there will be some form of evasive maneuverability around that particular site, which could see smaller trees, saplings, woodland floors, etc., being disturbed, maybe harmed. Again, you can get around that by placing different types of it's almost like a plastic, quite a thick plastic bedding, which tries to help support the roots. So you can do that when you're building something, and it can help support tree roots, etc. So you'd have to have that. Those kind of things do actually cost a lot of money. So then you could see the balance of, and rightly so, the protection of the natural habitat would come first and foremost, but you might find the cost may be inhibitive of that actually taking place. So hopefully I've been able to answer that. I can't see any more questions coming in, guys, so I would like to draw it to a close now. But I'd firstly like to say thank you ever so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And if anybody has got any other questions, you can forward those through to Farmers Weekly. I will do my very best to answer these before I go away on Friday. Any others that are on there that I haven't already answered that I did mention I'd reach out to directly. So I'll try and do that in the next couple of days. But I would say thank you once again for joining me, and a big thank you to Farmers Weekly for putting on the event for me as well. So thank you very much.